Well, thank you, Paige, and hello, everyone. We've learned a number of things over the years, and it's great to be able to share them with you outside of just preparing reserve studies for you. This curriculum itself was inspired by a National Manager of the Year finalist who appreciated our reserve budget webinars, reserve study portions, reserve study aspects webinars that explained all the ins and outs of reserve studies, but she noticed a blind spot in our curriculum. We're aware that boards and managers need help making reserve-related decisions all through the year, not just at budget time. Financial success for an association comes from a combination of a good budget and wise decisions that are made on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis throughout the year. So that's what we're going to deliver today, because we want to help you and your associations move forward towards success. So thank you, Mary Arnold from Real Manage. And as Paige indicated, this course is now approved for CE credit through 3 different organizations: CAMICB, State of Colorado's Division of Real Estate, and Florida's Department of Business and Professional Regulation. Those of you who indicated in the registration process that you were interested in CE credit should receive a certificate of completion within approximately 1 week. Well, I hope you have some paper and are prepared to take notes, but for your peace of mind, we're recording today's session. We'll also have an outline of today's program for everyone who fills out a short survey at the end of the webinar today. So thank you to everyone who keeps making suggestions on topics that we can compile, that we can present, so we can increase the value of our curriculum and help you guys have success with your jobs. The outline that we send to those who complete that survey will be a great resource for you to refer to in the future. And in addition to the curriculum, it'll include our Q&A discussion, a link to the webinar recording, and some extra resources I'll speak about throughout the program today. And as Paige indicated, this is a live presentation, and everyone's been muted to keep the background noise to a minimum. But to improve the experience, I want to point out a few controls. Every once in a while, I'll ask for your feedback so you can connect with me and all the other attendees. And the way to respond is to raise your hand by clicking on that little hands raised icon that the arrow points to on your screen. It'll be in your control panel that's likely off on the right. And if you came with a question, or if at any point in time you think of a question that arose due to something I've said, just type it in the dialog box in your control panel, again similar to the one that you see on screen. Paige will be monitoring those throughout our session and select from those at the end during our Q&A time. So without further delay, give me a hands raised if you're ready for me to get going on today's presentation. Hands raised. Very good. Thank you. Don't go far from your mouse, because we'll be doing this again. Okay, I just put everyone's hands down. And here we go. Roadmap to success with reserves begins with a successful strategy. So we're not talking about the reserve study itself, we're talking about strategy. Success comes from the board committed to protect, maintain, and enhance the assets of the association. That maximizes property values and builds a strong community. That's where we want to go. A reserve study helps the board with that strategy by creating a plan to guide the association into the future. Obviously identifying the major upcoming expenses and how to prepare financially. And success comes from collecting the right amount of money, spending it appropriately, and adjusting that plan on an ongoing basis. This means that through the year, the board and management have a lot of decisions to make. They have opportunities to choose opportune words and take actions that support the plan, hopefully things that move them forward in their strategy. So let's start with that theme, strategy. A winning strategy means using words and phrases that give you the upper hand from the start. So in your discussion about reserves, that means always speaking about reserves in present tense terms. Reserve contributions are for the present. Reserve contributions are not for the future. They're not for a slush fund, not for a rainy day. Reserve contributions offset that ongoing daily, weekly, monthly deterioration of all the things at the association. Now, I think we all know that the reserve expenses are going to be scattered irregularly over future years. And the reserve contributions offset that ongoing cost of ongoing steady deterioration that's as real as any other bill at the association. So anytime a conversation at your association starts straying towards the future, bring it back, emphasizing that deterioration is ongoing. It's not a singular event in the future. It's now. The cost is not going away, and every owner needs to pay their fair share of what they're enjoying and using up, just like the electricity bill, the water bill, management, anything else they're using at the association. So give me hands raised if you understand that concept, that reserve contributions are for the present. Don't let the conversation go into talking about the future. Steer them away. Fantastic. Okay, thanks. Hands down. All right, and keep the conversation simple. We've summarized it in what we call the 4 reserve rules. The expenses are inevitable. Again, it's that ongoing cost of deterioration due to the board having physical assets to maintain. And the board's fundamentally responsible to protect, maintain, and enhance those assets. And if they delay and deferred maintenance sets in, those same expenses will grow. They'll just get bigger. And unfortunately, those well-intended delays end up costing the homeowners more money. The homeowners always get stuck paying the bills. And again, 4 reserve rules. Keep it simple. And keep the board's eye on the ball. It's their job to protect, maintain, and enhance the assets of the association, basically running the association in a financially sound and sustainable manner. That means that guessing or inaction, sitting on their hands, is irresponsible. Time marches on. That deterioration that I spoke about keeps moving, keeps marching on, and so waiting, delaying just gets the association further behind. Actions and expenditures are necessary, and that's what we're going to talk about here today. Strategically moving forward, reducing any uncertainty, keeping things on track. And inaction, I want to emphasize, actually exposes the board to increased litigation risk because they lose their protection from the business judgment rule when they fail to act in the best interests of the needs of the association, and especially if they do so without making reasonable inquiry and getting an updated reserve study, or actually ignoring the recommendations in a reserve study. Now, boards who say we can't afford adequate reserve contributions are clearly expressing their opinion that they don't understand that reserve expenses are a bill just like any other bill. They're not acting in the best interest of the association, off on the right, if they say we're not going to pay that bill. It's their job. They have the power and responsibility to set the budget, and that's their role as a board member. And I'll start with getting the reserve study, which brings us to why I'm here today, either for the first time or an update. Reserve study helps the association avoid surprises by helping them see ahead into the future. It reduces cost by minimizing that expensive deferred maintenance. It reduces liability, maximizes property value due to the property looking good and well maintained, and it keeps the association in compliance with local state laws. And in addition, there's that intangible benefit of keeping the owners informed, basically reassuring them that the board has a plan and they're implementing the plan to care for the association without the homeowners having to fear a special assessment. Now, on the other hand, there's some dire consequences, exposing the boards and the owners to surprises, increased exposure to special assessments when the association isn't prepared financially, higher expenses in general, uninsured liability, and the D's. And I'm going to give that a page of its own. And the D's, a short list is disappointment, discouragement, dysfunction with board inaction, deterioration because there's no money available to fix things, declining home values because of poor curb appeal or rumors of special assessments that the real estate agents know about, and distrust when the owners don't feel like the board is looking after their best interests and taking care of the property. Now remember that you're budgeting and taking care of the association because it's necessary, not because of the law. You don't prepare a reserve study, for instance, in the 25 or so states that require reserve studies or reserve study disclosures. You don't do it just to comply with the law. That's just an example. Reserve studies help the board make informed choices, and the board, whether the law specifically says it or not, the board is responsible to run their multi-million-dollar not-for-profit real estate corporation in a fiscally responsible manner. Okay, let's look at boards themselves. A lot of managers here. I think Paige indicated, or you guys indicated, that portfolio managers are the highest group here today. But let's talk about the boards. The managers are the agent for the board. The board makes the decisions. That's their job. But how do the managers effectively encourage or influence the board towards making wise choices? Let's get inside their head. Well, we all know the theory that the board's responsible to run the association, but the reality is that they often act like their job is to keep assessments low. And give me a quick hands raised if you're working with one or more associations where it seems like all the board cares about is keeping the assessments low. Interesting. There's a bunch, but really not too many, maybe about a quarter. Okay, I'm going to put hands down. That's actually good news, that only about a quarter of you are representing associations where the board is living in a mindset of limitations, not responsibilities. So remind the board that running the association is their job. Keep their focus on the ball. And let me actually give you a new tool, that doing the right thing is actually in their financial best interests. In a study that we completed last year, we looked at comparable associations in a similar geographical area. We found that home prices on a dollar per square foot basis were 12.6% higher in associations with a well-funded reserves, those with above 70% funded. And that means that running the association in a fiscally responsible manner provides a strong return on home values. Again, put into real numbers, a few more dollars per month in reserve contributions and the slightly higher homeowner assessments that come with that maximizes curb appeal and returns, hear it, thousands of dollars to each owner in maximized home values. So that's a big payback for doing the right thing. So a roadmap for success starts with a strategy of focusing on that simple message of responsibly budgeting to offset ongoing deterioration. And that ends up paying off handsomely with great things at the association and maximized home values for individual owners. It's all good. Okay, how does a reserve study affect things? And how can I help you put it effectively into practice? Well, the good thing is that these are not just my ideas. All of reserve study standards were put into place back in 1998. So these are national standard principles. Understand, or help your boards understand, that there's 3 types of reserve studies: a full reserve study and 2 update products, a with-site visit update and a no-site visit update. So reserve studies come in these 3 flavors, and you may see them referred to as numbers. We need a level 2 update. It's probably better that you call it an update with site visit, but they are also known in numerical with number names. Now, be aware that a full reserve study typically only needs to be done once. So the vast majority of reserve studies performed in the United States are those less expensive with site visit and no site visit updates. Most of those with site visit updates are done every 3 to 5 years, and sometimes that's influenced not just by what the property needs, but by local state laws. The no site visit updates are done in the in-between years. And remember, all those update products are significantly less expensive than that first full reserve study engagement. And then again, helping you understand and articulate strategically what's going on with the reserves and reserves budget. Let me show you that there's 3 parts or 3 elements of the reserve study, and it starts with a component list which is where you find all the association's major repair or replacement projects identified. So what are the right reserve projects? How do you know you're reserving for the right things? Well, by definition, they are supposed to meet the National Reserve Study Standard 4-part test. We in the reserve study business use this 4-part test, and you should be familiar with it. So to be funded through reserves, a project needs to be a common area maintenance responsibility, have a limited useful life, have a predictable remaining useful life, and be above a threshold minimum cost of significance. So projects that pass this 4-part test are the ones at your association that should be funded through reserves. And I'll come back to that in just another moment or two. Now, this is important because most of your reserve decisions through the year will be spending choices. So when do you spend reserve dollars? When the project appears in the reserve study, or when something big breaks, when the remaining useful life hits 0? Give me a hands raised if these are some of the kind of common questions that you hear or address during the course of the year. Looking forward to the reserve study, something big breaks. Oh wow, hands up everywhere. Okay, excellent. Well, good. That's what we'll be talking about today. I'll understand that there's, to help you with this, I'm going to give you kind of 2 things to look at. First is there's generally 5 ways a component can fail. And you see them characterized here in colors, green, yellow, and red. Green means you can barge right through. Red means stop and take care of it. Green are the inconsequential things when failure is no big deal. Maybe just like a pool heater, you wait for it to break and then you replace it a few days later. The reevaluate projects are kind of like a wobbly perimeter fence, not too big of a deal. Obsolescence might be something like outdated furniture in the rec room. Not a big deal, you know it needs to be addressed, but it's not critical. Those yellows kind of have a soft replacement schedule. And then there's protection projects, like painting your wood trim or sealing your asphalt or decks. Those are scheduled projects you should do on time, or they're going to get expensive. You're going to bemoan the fact that you didn't do them on time. And then there's catastrophic projects, entry access limitation systems, fire alarm systems, elevator functionality, hot water systems, things that need to work or there's going to be big problems at the association. So understanding the different kinds of failures, how they approach remaining useful life of 0, helps guide you towards your reserve project timing decisions. Do we do it now or do we delay? And the bottom line is don't delay the red protection or catastrophic projects. For example, this is a protection project that was delayed. It was an inexpensive, supposed to be an inexpensive 15 cents a square foot asphalt seal project that the board said, we don't want to spend that kind of money. Well, they waited a few years and it led to deterioration that resulted in a very expensive remove and replace project, which is about 15 times the cost of that seal coat that they saved spending the money on. So they ended up costing the homeowners a lot of money. And this is a similar protection project, metalwork that went unpainted because the board wanted to save a few dollars. As you can see, it's just perimeter ironwork adjacent to a green belt outside the association. But that $8 per lineal foot repaint project became about a $70 or $80 repair project because they wanted to save a few dollars here and there. And look at this roof. It was a reevaluate project. It was getting close to, this actual situation had a remaining useful life of 0 in the reserve study, and that reserve study was one that they did not update. So every time they looked at the reserve study, they said, it has a remaining useful life of 1 year, even though the reserve study was now 2 or 3 years old. So delays in addressing that issue and replacing the roof meant that it began to leak, which led to significant water intrusion expenses, disruptions, and significant roof replacement cost overruns. You can see there was plastic. It was just a messy situation. So waiting too long got very expensive, very disruptive. Okay, this is what a typical reserve component list looks like. And according to that National Reserve Study Standard issue, you can, or the 4-part test, you can see there's a project description, a useful life, remaining useful life, and current replacement cost. And remember, these were all that passed that 4-part test. But let's look a little bit closer. See, number 2 is the pool resurface line item. And at this association, let's presume the hypothetical that the pool heater has failed. And you look and it clearly doesn't appear as a component. So what do? Can you replace it with reserve funds? So take a moment and think, what do I spend? How do I fix this pool heater? Hands up for spend it from reserves. Okay, just a few. I'm going to put hands down, and hands up for spend it from operating. A bunch more. Okay, the majority are feeling operating. Okay, I'm going to put hands down. So what do? Well, first, double check the reserve study. Look a little deeper into their report. Maybe that report has been updated and that should have been called pool system, not just pool resurface, and the money is actually there to accomplish the pool heater. So if you don't find it in the detailed description somewhere deeper in the report, call your reserve study provider. They should be considered part of your team. And your reserve study provider will probably look at their notes and do the same looking at the 4-part test. And remember, reserve components are defined by the 4-part test. If it passes the 4-part test, it's a reserve expense. Spend the dollars from reserves. So make a note and remind your reserve study provider of the next update to add the pool heater in your next update. That's how you decide about a component that doesn't appear in your reserve component list. And an example of how your reserve study gets better each time it's updated. Okay, suppose a project costs more or less than expected. Well, the first thing you do is perform the project, because that's the board's responsibility to help them achieve that primary goal to maintain, protect, and enhance the assets of the association. Now, figure that the reserve funds will be reallocated in the next update, whether it was an overspend or underspend issue. A reserve study actually presumes some projects are going to come in under budget and some will come in over budget. And here's a key point. If it's different than expected, either in cost or timing, again, spend the dollars from reserves and then adjust the cost or life estimate in the next update. And let me add a little more to that, another tip. If the project is minor enough that it doesn't even affect the remaining useful life of a project, it's a maintenance expense. For instance, vacuuming the hallway. It's something that you responsibly do, but vacuuming the hallway is not a reserve expense. If you end up replacing a big chunk of the hallway carpet, then maybe you divide the hallway carpet replace line item into 2, new and the old, then you're affecting the reserve study and that becomes a reserve expense. So that helps you decide maintenance versus reserves. If it affects the reserve study, it's a reserve expense. And that asterisk is also because in some states there are requirements to separate reserves between components. Specifically in Florida, if you're funding by the component method, that means not spending fence dollars on roof projects and vice versa. So check with your reserve study provider, but that again is usually just handled by an inter-fund transfer, reallocating funds in the next reserve study update. Not a big deal. Help the board fulfill their responsibility. Expenses happen, they need to address them, they need to take action. The board has a responsibility to run the affairs of the association, keep their eyes on that objective. Delaying major projects, even if they say, well, if I don't spend it now, I'll save some money. Delaying major projects regularly gets expensive, and remember, 4 reserve rules, the homeowners always get stuck with the bill. So help try to keep that bill small. And what do you do about if it doesn't appear on the reserve study because it's a capital improvement. Well, follow me through with this. If it's a natural upgrade, if it was a reserve project and the upgrade is simply a new material or technology, it's still a reserve project. Do the project from reserves. Now, the key distinction is if the project or asset exists. But adding an entirely new asset like a new dock or a new tennis court where one did not previously exist, that's a capital improvement and not legitimate use of reserve funds. So if the asset or project exists is a key distinction. Remember that reserves offset the ongoing deterioration of existing assets. They're not a slush fund to be used to buy new things for the association. Okay? Now, let's talk about the second of the three parts of the reserve study. Do they have enough? Now, often the cash numbers seem big, and that's in most cases very true. But remember that everything's expensive, and reserve projects are big, and because of that, they take years of financial preparation. So another terminology issue to use with your boards is to discuss reserve fund size in terms of percent funded. That gives it some meaning, because dollars can sound big, but they're only meaningful when they're compared to the dollar needs of the association. For instance, $500,000 can sound like a big number until you realize that for a particular association, that's only 23% of what they should have at this time. So percent funded helps you and the board know the relative balance between the reserve funds they have on hand and the cash needs of the association. It gives you that sense of balance. Which do we have more of? And quite often they have more deterioration than they have funds, kind of like the man on the left. And remember that that cost of deterioration is ongoing on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. Percent funded reveals if the ongoing contributions have kept pace with that ongoing deterioration over the years or if it's fallen behind. Now, here's the cross-section of percent funded of associations across the country. The weak associations are in the red on the left, and the strong associations are in the green on the right. The red ones are the ones with special assessments, deferred maintenance, turmoil, political problems, those kinds of things, the Ds that I spoke about earlier. The green ones on the right are the responsible associations. They're easier to manage, they take less time, they're more professionally run, they have stronger boards because they have the dollars to protect, maintain, and enhance the assets of the association. They've done the right things, and there are benefits. As you can see, the peak is in the yellow range. There's the greatest number of associations across the country that are in that yellow middle range. And this chart shows you why percent funded matters. You can predict most special assessments. You can see them coming years in advance. And they're common when the association is in that 0 to 30% funded red zone on the left. On the other hand, special assessments are uncommon in that yellow middle zone, 20% or less of the time, and they're very rare over on the right in the green zone. Again, a very tangible demonstration of benefits of being well funded. And the last of the three reserve study parts, understanding it and communicating it, is the funding plan. How much does it take on an ongoing basis to fund and offset deterioration? But before we talk about how much in actual dollar amounts, let's talk about why. Budgeted contributions are how every owner pays their fair share of that steady, predictable, ongoing deterioration, so the funds exist when they're needed. And you got to think of it this way. The future takes care of itself when you take care of business today. When you're not deferring current bills, there won't be extra bills in the future. So that's how associations avoid unfair special assessments and expensive, avoidable deferred maintenance. And that's all part of that strategic roadmap to success, okay? Contributions are not for the future. Stay away from allowing people to talk about the future. With properly sized contributions, everyone pays their fair share lots of good things happen, and property values are maximized. That's what you want to move towards. Okay, so let's talk about numbers. Every association has a different assessment structure, but what we find is very interesting. Here's a cross-section profile among all associations of how much they need to pay to be adequately making reserve contributions. And what we find is consistent, whether it's a high-rise, mid-rise, townhome, homeowners association, reserve projects, as I said earlier, are expensive. And they typically require contributions anywhere from 15% to about 40% of the total budget. If you were to think of an average, you might pick a number like 25%. It's a big deal, and it's a big element of every association's budget. And here's another way to visualize it. Again, 15 to 40% is typical, but think about 25% as a good starting point. That's what I would say as a first guess. Free advice, start with 25%. It's a big chunk, but remember, that's the board's job. It's a bill at the association that they need to pay. And if they don't pay it, it's just going to get more expensive, and someone else is going to have to pay it downstream. So some of your boards are going to say, we can't afford that. And give me a hands raised if you think that you're going to go to your next board meeting and say, typical association needs to be setting aside 25%, and the rest of the board just kind of snickers and laughs at you and say, we can't do that. Okay, that's a pretty good chunk, about 1/3. Thank you. I'm going to put hands down. Well, that attitude is to be expected if they've been under reserving for years. But I want to argue that reserve contributions are affordable. Reserve contributions are about $3 to $5 a day for the typical condominium owner. And that's about the cost of a coffee drink. So don't let any owner or board member tell you that they can't afford it. They can afford it on a dollar basis. They may choose to have a coffee rather than make the reserve contributions. And that indeed is a choice. It's not a matter of affordability. And remember the 4 reserve rules. Homeowners always get stuck paying the bill. Well, let's see if we can keep that bill small. Here's 3 different ways to pay for a $250,000 roof that happens every 15 years. If the board made budgeted contributions and we're getting 1% on their reserve funds, over 15 years, the owners would only have to put in about $232,000 in order to pay that $250,000 roof bill. The bank would pay the rest in interest. Of course, you can special assess immediately $250,000 for that bill, or you can wait till the last minute and get a loan that at current terms will end up costing the owners about $320,000. So look at it there. It's a big difference between the loan total and the contributions total. The boards that choose to saddle the owners with a loan will end up costing their owners about $90,000 more for that roof than if they would have paid on a gradual, ongoing basis. That's avoidable. That's a great way to minimize reserve expenses. And this is not really your area, but I want to give you a talking point. Some of you have a treasurer or board member that's going to bring up issues about their preference for a particular method of calculating reserve contributions. It should not be a big deal. It's almost like choosing a vehicle. You can get a gas car or a diesel car or an electric car or a hybrid. Both the straight line or component method and cash flow method, as you can recall, are just the funding plan aspect of a reserve study. They both deal with exactly the same expenses. So they both pay for the same expenses, so it's almost trivia. It's just different flavors of the same thing. Both fund exactly the same projects. We have a webinar on that if you want to go into further discussion or learn more on that issue, but fundamentally that should not be a big topic of discussion. And what do you do if you think that your association is still going to have a hard time facing a steep increase? Well, fortunately, in most cases, you can design a multi-year solution. You can talk them into raising their reserve contributions by $10 per month per owner this year, and then plan on doing it again next year. So in just 2, 3, 4, 5 years, most associations, all those who are underfunding now, can be making adequate reserve contributions in just a few years. Just a few adjustments over a few years. Give me a hands raised if you think underfunded associations should be able to do this. $10 a year increases. Great, you're all with me on this. Most associations do have a few years, and they can use a reserve study to create a multi-year plan to strategically change the future of their association. Okay, let's now kind of close this section of the webinar with a little talking about your strategy. How do you read a reserve study quickly? Well, look for the fiscal year for which it was prepared. Remember that they get out of date quickly. Look for the type of reserve study, meaning a full with-site visit or update, no site visit, and look for the component list based on, now you know, the National Reserve Study Standard 4-part test, an evaluation of reserve fund strength that says you have X amount of cash, which means you are X% funded, and the recommended funding plan. That's a summary of what you should be looking for. And if the reserve study is just brand new, if you got it fresh this year, what do you do? Well, we recommend distributing the executive summary to all the owners. That's pretty much the purpose of the executive summary, and then making the complete reserve study available for those who request it. And I'm not sure your policy, but quite often you are able to charge for making copies of that kind of information. And then what do you do at the association? By all means, collect the recommended contributions, but how do you account for it? Is it one contribution or 27 different contributions? Well, in most cases, our recommendation is make the deposit and let it be. Those funds are going to get spent as reserve funds on reserve projects. So in most cases, just save a lot of time of dividing it up and just leave the contribution as reserves. They're just going to get technically rebalanced next year if they were divided up anyway. And how do you measure success? Well, measure it by a lack of special assessments, projects getting done on time, the reserve fund at or above or approaching 70% funded, reserves spent appropriately on projects. The asterisk is 4, projects that pass the 4-part test, and the operating fund standing on its own, not needing to borrow from reserves. And how to have success in that annual budgeting process? Well, our recommendation is use fresh information. All reserve study information changes and gets outdated as time marches on. Some states require a with-site visit update at least every 3 to 5 years, and that's actually a pretty good standard. As you now know, reserve contributions comprise a pretty significant chunk of the annual budget, and I'd argue that's worthy of revisiting annually. And the proof of that is that when we look at our association clients, the special assessments among those who update the reserve study annually, one way or another, are about 30% less than those who wait 3 to 5 or more years. It really helps to keep your reserve contributions on target and to keep the budget focused on the needs of the association. And so think about protecting yourself. What do you do? Whether you're a minority board member or a manager, make sure that you get your position put into the meeting notes. And I'm presuming that you've articulated these types of issues, that the reserve contributions are as necessary as paying for any other bill at the association, the benefits, net increase in property values, lots of good things, but do protect yourself. And then the board is going to do what they want to do with majority rule, but at least knowing that your opinion has been clearly marked in the record you can go home and get a good night's rest. The result is that a roadmap for success boils down to some pretty simple things: collecting what's necessary, spending it wisely on the right projects, and then adjusting the plan, keeping the board's eyes on the ball. And as I kind of suggested earlier, we have a few additional resources. When we last presented this material, it resonated with enough attendees in their after session comments that they asked for a part 2, follow up with more details, and that roadmap part 2 is available as a recorded webinar on our website. In addition, it inspired an article that got published in CAI's Common Ground. We'll have a link to that. And we also did a more detailed presentation of this with a lot of examples at the TOPS Software Annual Conference. And that link to that recorded presentation is also going to be included in the outline. Of course, we have we have a deep, I would say, library of resources in our Learning Center. We are in the business, fundamentally, of helping associations get to an improved future through preparing reserve studies for them, helping them see the expenses that are inevitable, helping them prepare for that. So if you're in need of a reserve study update, by all means, request a proposal. We make that easy for you. And if you didn't hear this webinar by getting an email from us, or if you'd like more people, specifically your board, other board members, to get this kind of information, get them to sign up for our email list. It's free. We don't oversend you stuff. It's just good content. So that brings me to the end of prepared curriculum for today. And so at this point in time, we'll transition to some Q&A time, and I'll turn the microphone over to Paige, who will serve as our MC as long as her voice holds up. So Paige.